How long does this shit last?
Five Nights at Freddy's is good. Well, we're not going to be talking about Security Breach because that is not good, and I feel bad that Scott let the project get out of line. But for the most part, the Five Nights at Freddy's games are good. I have no say with the books. It's been a while and I can't really make a fair judgment on them. The first game came out when I started middle school. At the time, the only people I was watching on YouTube were DanTDM, Stampy Longnose, and popular MMOs. I was so scared and I tried to stay away from the series as much as possible. Eventually, it's 2017 and I start to warm up to horror. I pushed past my fear of jump scares and finally started to check out Five Nights at Freddy's. I'll never forget about how I binged Markiplier and checked out numerous videos on fan games, all on my 3DS while I was on a vacation in Texas for 3 weeks. Really fond memories there. So this was originally going to be a video about how underrated FNAF 3 is, but A, I've already written a lot about the other games, and B, someone made that already. Twice. Which is why I invited them to help me out with this video. What we're going to be doing is analyzing the first 7 entries in the series and see how Scott's game design philosophy evolved with it. By the end of the video, we'll see which game was the best, which was my favorite, and how some entries fell flat. Without further ado, let's start by going back. All the way back to the beginning. To say that the success of the first game released back in 2014 was just luck is pretty unfair. Sure, YouTubers gave it a boost, but there's always horror games that make rounds on YouTube and aren't talked about nearly as much. Besides, FNAF 1 was being suggested en masse to a lot of big names before the game even got big on YouTube at all. Five Nights at Freddy's was a unique horror experience that is genuinely scary and full of a lot of thrills. I think Scott Cawthon himself said it perfectly. It was the right mix of ingredients made at the right time. I'll never forget watching YouTubers flick through the cameras and then start panicking when they realize Bonnie went missing from the stage. That's the kind of shit that makes this game so good. I heard people complain about how overrated it is and that the gameplay is just flipping through cameras, but like, does it fucking matter? Being situated in an office, knowing the creepy animatronics are probably going to come and kill you while only being able to watch them approach and use what little means of defense you can, I think it all works really well.
I agree with a lot of the points Fizz mentioned here. What made FNAF so special in the first place was that it was an experience that was completely unique to itself. Horror games during 2014 were very similar in their style and direction. So many games released during that time focus on a free roam environment where some kind of monster either chased after or stalked the player. Games like PT, Alien Isolation, and Evil Within are some examples of what I mean. All of these games are great, don't get me wrong, but what made FNAF so special upon its release was that it was so fundamentally different from anything we'd ever seen or played. And there was something else about FNAF which I feel made it so special, and that was the unknown factor which came from the game. Because FNAF was so different, because it focused on an idea we never saw before, it made us afraid of what we would expect from the experience. I remember watching people play the original Five Nights at Freddy's and being scared out of my mind just because I had no idea what would happen when one of the animatronics actually arrived at the doors. When you're thrown into a horrifying environment like FNAF's where you know nothing about what's coming, your mind starts to fill in the blanks about what's going to happen, and the imagery of what you imagine in your head is always worse than what actually ends up happening. I feel like a lot of people who first found FNAF back in 2014 went through this. And that kind of fear of not wanting to find out what happens when you're caught stuck with people for a really long time. I know it stuck with me, and I've been a fan of this franchise for almost 8 years now.
And that's not even to mention all the uncanny little Easter eggs, like Golden Freddy and the It's Me shit. It's frightening, and the gameplay only gets even more fun after you've gotten over the fear factor and know how everything works as things get more difficult. That's why I believe it to be the best and scariest game in the series. Cawthon took what he learned from his previous games and knew how to make something freaky. The animatronics look so gritty and dank, which really complement the jump scares. It's crazy how much of a glow up it was from his previous works. Later in 2014, the sequel was released. Scott wanted to make another game with more focus on gameplay and hectic thrills, and, well, he succeeded. Kinda. It's true, there were a lot more foes to ward off and more tools to utilize. You had to worry about animatronics coming at you from the left, right, and in front of you. Shine your light on Foxy, wind up the puppet's box, equip the Freddy mask to fool the several robots in empty ghost suits trying to kill you. I'd say that's hectic indeed. There's just one small problem. Scott essentially forgot what made the first game so worthy of being such a scarefest. I understand wanting to focus on gameplay more this time around, and maybe you just wanted to go with a different aesthetic than the first game. But these jump scares just don't blend in well, and the animations themselves are just bad. Alright. Earlier, I exhibited how I was amazed that Scott could pull off such a good horror aesthetic after working on cheesy Christian games, but I think that history is really apparent with FNAF 2. But I will say it's most likely because FNAF 1's jump scares were animated with a background. This is probably why the shots in the camera feed in FNAF 2 look so good as well. The jump scares in FNAF 2, however, are transparent, so it makes sense they don't blend in well. Maybe they'd look better if they didn't freeze frame at the end. I can only imagine how much worse it'd look if FNAF 2's office was even grittier. I will say though, I do find it amusing that Golden Freddy's jump scare isn't just a PNG increasing in size, but the head is actually animated to come closer to the screen. Apparently, the change in lighting and reflection on the head is supposed to hint that this is the case. Fortunately, Scott did get way better at designing transparent jump scares that worked well in his future games, which can be seen in Ultimate Custom Night, FNAF 6, Sister Location, and of course, Five Nights at Freddy's 3. Alright, so I'm writing this part of the script after I just finished beating FNAF 3 for the first time, so I'm feeling super pumped. Let's hop into it. So up until now, while people loved the addictive gameplay, it would still eventually boil down to doing the same short cycle of things over and over again. Check in front of you, check the one relevant camera, rinse and repeat. It's clear that Scott wanted to create a broader experience that required more strategy and focus. Thus, FNAF 3 was born. All those aspects I mentioned, FNAF 3 fucking delivered. I always found it really engaging trying to keep track of Springtrap and adapt accordingly, along with managing your systems. It's so refreshing to have all of the cameras be relevant. On top of that, like I mentioned earlier, Scott managed to make a nice environment and actually animate some nice transparent jump scares for them. Look at all this, it just blends in so well. And might I add, Springtrap himself is awesome. His design is amazing and he really gives off that big bad vibe. You can tell you're in the presence of a murderous fiend and he is coming for you.
I couldn't agree more with this point. What makes Springtrap's design work so well to me is the fact that there was so much effort made in making him look really grotesque and zombie-like. The green coloration of his suit, the sort of veiny texture covering his body, the little bits of flesh poking out from the suit, and, in my opinion, the most effective part of his design, his eyes. There are so many visual cues about Springtrap that are meant to make him look terrifying, but those piercing white eyes always stood out to me the most. The fact that they're the eyes of the corpse in the suit instead of the animatronic eyes is a small touch I always really loved, especially combined with the fact that you can see the empty sockets of the corpse they belong to behind the suit at all times. I think another cool little thing about the eyes is that all the Phantom characters have them. It gives me the feeling that Springtrap is always watching me, that the Phantoms exist to make his advance towards me all the easier, and that there is no escaping his presence. I'm probably reading more into it than I should, but it's a detail I always thought was pretty awesome.
I don't even care if Springtrap's jump scare isn't scary enough. I honestly don't think it needs to be. It's funny to me how people complain about jump scares being cheap, but then also complain about Springtrap not having a proper jump scare. It gives a sense of dread and panic, does it not? That's another thing. The gameplay sparks panic. See, when you get used to the scares of the previous FNAF games, they stopped being scary. After that, you just keep sweating on them. Once you make a mistake, it's over, poof, and then you just move on. But that fear doesn't stop when you're playing FNAF 3. I still think FNAF 1 is the scariest, but at least FNAF 3 still makes you feel pressure even after it stops being scary. Once you make a mistake, you do the best you can to try and fix it, and then stuff keeps piling on, and it just feels so good when you're able to triumph even after the puppet decided to show his ugly face, or when BB made you lose sight of Springtrap, or when you see him approach the cameras even closer to your office. This is exactly what the series needed. There needs to be variety, there needs to be pressure, there needs to be panic. Scott just couldn't keep making games where you keep doing the same damn thing several times a night. It's all just so... Oh, wait, what's that? Scott made a game where you keep doing the same damn thing several times a night? Right after this one? Oh boy. Yeah, turns out a lot of people actually didn't like FNAF 3. From what I can assume, Scott took what everyone liked about the first game and built upon it, completely forsaking the cool ideas FNAF 3 had and reverting back to the spookiness that FNAF 1 had, as well as improving the linear fast-paced gameplay of checking different animatronics that everyone loved. Okay, to his credit, he pulled it off pretty damn well. Rather than FNAF 1 and 2, where you were in a cycle of making sure each animatronic doesn't get out of line, FNAF 4 was very stressful and punishing, since you had to manage how you check on the animatronics. Whether you were closing the door on Bonnie or Chica, or shoving Foxy back into the closet, or scaring the Freddles off your bed, the other animatronics could still make advances on you during those moments. Should you deal with Bonnie, who is rapidly approaching your left door? Or maybe you should clear your bed of the Freddles, since they've swarmed so much. You really had to organize what you were doing. And I think Scott did a great job with improving the check on each animatronic thing that became apparent to everyone in the older games when they learned not all of the cameras were useful. Sister Location is an interesting one. The game has you allegedly assuming the role of a late-night technician, having to do various tasks to make sure the animatronics are in proper working order. This game is more story-driven than the previous installments, and each of the 5 nights were very different. Needless to say, it was a huge deviation from the norm that was already established in the franchise, which is what it needed. Despite being more or less a glorified minigame collection, Sister Location excels in one specific thing: atmosphere. See, while the previous entries in the series were perfectly scary, you still knew there were things out there to kill you. You also knew the formula the game is played by, and had to follow it 5 times. But here, you had zero clue what to expect from anything, whether it was doing repairs on Freddy, or wandering through a dark room, or restoring power to the facility. There was always a new type of threat lurking in the shadows, with no clue how to stop it or what it was. Unfortunately, as the atmosphere carried the aforementioned minigames, Sister Location does not have much replayability. Definitely not as much as the other games with the addictive gameplay.
This is another point I agree a lot with. My main problem with Sister Location is that it feels like everything is a tutorial. Because every single night is a new type of minigame, you have to constantly sit through each part of it, having everything explained to you in painstaking detail while you just wait to actually play the game. In first playthroughs, this isn't much of an issue. However, it becomes extraordinarily annoying to me when I just want to play through the game for fun. I also feel like the game having these sort of minigame style nights took away from the challenge of the main game. Sure, we did end up getting the custom night, but that doesn't feel like Sister Location, it feels like a different game. I would have loved to see some way to access more difficult versions of the main nights in the story mode, since they were actually pretty fun once the game was done explaining everything to me. I'm glad we got games like Help Wanted, which were finally able to give me that for some of the later nights, like Funtime Foxy. I'm just sad we never got to see something like that in Sister Location itself, though.
Regarding the custom night, I will say it was pretty damn fun. The nights themselves were an action-reaction test, with almost all of the animatronics giving you certain cues and you having to respond to them in the appropriate ways. The only exception to this was Funtime Foxy, who worked just like his counterpart in the first game. Again, super fun stuff, and I'm glad Scott was able to provide this game with such an amazing and spooky atmosphere that emphasized fear of the unknown, and then gave the game something that we could have even more fun with. I was really debating whether I should have brought up FNAF 6 in this video or not, but I think it's important that I do. Because FNAF 6 shows that by this point, the series had done everything it could have done in a satisfying way. And no, Security Breach doesn't say otherwise. It was a glorified walking simulator that Scott failed to keep in line. But I'm getting off topic. FNAF 6 was made out of obligation. Its purpose was to wrap up the story in a satisfying way, as Scott admitted in an interview with Dawko. So naturally, the gameplay for it came secondary. Admittedly, I haven't played the game myself because I'm not really interested enough, but it looked like Scott at least wanted to create some sort of tech demo where various mechanics could work both in tandem and against each other. Like how you needed to turn the fan off to create less noise, but keeping it off for too long would cause your office to overheat. It added a new layer of strategy to these games, which was definitely the polar opposite to Sister Location's action-reaction gameplay in its custom night. I call it a tech demo because Scott incorporated these ideas really well into the next and final game Scott developed for this series, that being Ultimate Custom Night. I think Ultimate Custom Night was a really good end-all be-all for the series. Scott took the ideas he formulated for FNAF 6 and fleshed them out amazingly for this game. With a lot of animatronics, there were a lot of mechanics as well. In the interview with Taco, Scott said that while he was never really concerned about making all of the max AI modes beatable, he felt that 50-20 mode had to be, and he designed the game around that. You had your heater, you had your fan, you had your various music boxes, and more. Heating the place up keeps some animatronics at bay, but not so much for others. You can keep your office nice and breezy with your fan, but it makes noise, and a handful of foes don't like that. The wide selection of tunes from your music box are not universally liked by all your buddies that are tuning in. Do you see where I'm going with this? While Scott created mechanics that were meant to work in tandem with each other to add more strategy, he also incorporated the action-reaction stuff that Sister Location's Custom Night introduced, as well as including concerns you need to check on and keep in mind that took up most of the series in the first place. It truly was the ultimate custom night, and it was the ultimate testament to what Scott had learned about game design over the years. Five Nights at Freddy's certainly wasn't for everyone. It may have been scary when it first debuted, but it didn't always make for the best Let's Play, and there were definitely people that groaned at the oversaturation of games. But despite that, there were still people that welcomed new entries with open arms, and it's been absolutely splendid watching Scott Cawthon grow with his community. Back when I first joined the fandom, I don't think I did a really good job at expressing my gratitude, so let me do it now. Thank you so much to Scott Cawthon for introducing me to a world I never knew I wanted to be a part of. It's been amazing, and I hope you enjoy your well-deserved time with your family. Also, a huge thank you to pastraspec for collaborating with me on this video. Please check him out. I linked his channel in the description. He makes excellent retrospectives, and he's also a great artist. He's also a fellow FNAF 3 enjoyer. And lastly, thank you everyone who still watches my channel. Hope you're looking forward to some more content, mainly funkin' stuff. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.
Thank fucking Christ! Thank you so much.